The night was drowning in rain when I found him collapsed on the road. Thunder ripped through the sky like a scream, and lightning flashed across the silver hood of a black car that had spun into the guardrail. I could barely see through the downpour, but when my flashlight caught a man's hand hanging limply from the door, I ran without thinking. He wasn't moving. Blood mixed with rainwater, trailing down his temple in thin crimson rivers. The air reeked of gasoline and burning metal, and all I could think of was he's going to die if I don't move now. "Sergey, can you hear me?" I shouted, slapping his cheek gently, my voice trembling. No response. My heart was hammering so hard it hurt. I looked around for help, but the highway was empty. Just the echo of rain and the hiss of steam from the engine. My umbrella flew away when I tried to open the car door. It was jammed. I screamed, slamming my shoulder against it until the metal gave way with a violent crunch. When I finally pulled him out, he was heavy, too heavy for me. But adrenaline made me stronger than I thought I could be. I dragged him under the nearby bridge, my knees scraping the asphalt, my hands shaking from cold and fear. His clothes were soaked, his pulse faint. I tore off my thin scarf and pressed it to his wound, whispering desperate words I didn't even realize I was saying. "Don't die on me, please don't die." I had no idea who he was. Just another stranger lost to the rain. But the look on his face, calm, almost peaceful, made me feel something strange in my chest. Like I was saving a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. Then suddenly he opened his eyes. They were dark, intense, and for a brief second, filled with something raw, pain, anger, guilt, I couldn't name it. His lips moved slightly, the sound barely escaping through the rain. "Lena." I froze. Who was Lena? His hand reached out weakly, brushing my face before falling limp again. "No, stay with me," I whispered, slapping his cheek lightly again. "Don't close your eyes." But his head dropped, his breathing shallow. I panicked, tearing my phone from my pocket, dialing the emergency number with trembling fingers. "Hello? There's been an accident, please, someone's hurt, he's bleeding." The operator's voice blurred with the rain. I could barely hear anything. I pressed my ear closer to the phone, but lightning struck again, cutting the call short. I screamed. The city lights in the distance flickered, then vanished as the power grid gave out. The highway was swallowed in darkness, the world reduced to nothing but storm and fear. I pressed my palm to his chest. His heartbeat faint but there. I had to get him somewhere safe. Dragging him wasn't an option anymore. My legs were burning, arms numb. So I did the only thing I could. I flagged down the next car that passed. It took 20 minutes. 20 long, merciless minutes in the freezing rain until finally, a truck slowed down, headlights blinding me. "Help! Please, he's hurt!" I shouted, waving frantically. The driver, a middle-aged man, jumped out, eyes wide when he saw the injured stranger. "What happened?" "Car accident, he's bleeding badly. Please, can you take us to the hospital?" He hesitated just for a moment, then nodded. Together we lifted the unconscious man into the back seat. I climbed in beside him, holding his hand tightly as the truck sped through the storm. The rain slapped the windows like angry hands. Each thunderclap made me flinch, but I kept whispering to him, "You're going to be fine, okay? Just hold on." He didn't answer. His head rested against my shoulder, breath shallow, cold seeping through his expensive clothes into my thin, soaked uniform. That's when I noticed the watch on his wrist, silver, sleek, and engraved with something I couldn't quite read under the flickering light. A luxury brand I'd only ever seen in magazine ads. Who was this man? I looked at his face again, the sharp jawline, the faint stubble, the kind of features that didn't belong to an ordinary person. There was something commanding even in his unconsciousness, something that made me feel small and uneasy. When we reached the hospital, nurses rushed out immediately. The driver explained what happened as they put him on a stretcher. I followed them into the emergency room until a nurse stopped me. "You can't go in there, miss." "But you're soaked and injured yourself," she said gently, noticing the blood on my sleeve. "Let the doctors handle it." I stood there, dripping on the white tiles, staring at the double doors that had closed behind him. My heart felt heavy for reasons I didn't understand. I didn't know his name. I didn't know why he called me Lena. But for some reason I couldn't walk away. Hours passed before a doctor finally came out. "He's stable now," he said. "Lost a lot of blood, but he'll recover. You said you found him on the highway." I nodded. "Yes. He almost died." The doctor gave me a curious look. "You saved his life, young lady. If you hadn't stopped, he wouldn't have made it another 10 minutes. Those words sank into me like a weight I didn't ask for. Save a stranger, and suddenly his life was tied to yours. As I left the hospital, dawn began to break through the storm clouds. I walked home barefoot because my shoes had fallen apart somewhere on the road. The wind was cold, but my thoughts were colder. That man's face wouldn't leave my mind. And I didn't know then, how could I? That saving him would be the very thing that destroyed the quiet life I'd built. Because the stranger I pulled from death's door wasn't just anyone. He was the CEO who ruled my city's skyline. And the man whose world was about to collide with mine in ways that would burn everything I thought I knew. I didn't expect to see him again. It had been 3 days since that stormy night, yet the image of his blood-soaked face haunted every time I closed my eyes. I still woke up in the middle of the night, hearing thunder, smelling gasoline, feeling the weight of his body against mine. I told myself to forget. People like him and people like me, we lived in different worlds. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. My name is Mei Lin, 24, nurse at Yunshin General Hospital. I grew up in a small mountain town, where the sound of rain was the only music we had. I'm quiet, maybe too quiet. People say I'm the kind who apologizes even when I'm not wrong. But I've always believed kindness isn't weakness. It's courage in softer form. That morning, I was on shift when the head nurse told me to prepare for a special patient in VIP room 803. She said it like it was a royal decree. "He's the CEO of Han Corporation," she whispered, eyes gleaming. "A very powerful man. Be careful what you say or do." My heart stopped. Han Corporation. I remembered the silver watch on his wrist, the engraved initials, H.L. Han Liang. The stranger I pulled from the storm was him. The head nurse assigned me to check his vitals and change his foredrip. My hands were trembling as I held the clipboard. I took a deep breath before pushing open the heavy glass door. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and wealth. Fresh lilies on the table, expensive leather chair, sunlight spilling through floor-length curtains. And there he was, sitting upright in bed, dressed in a pale hospital robe. Awake. Alive. And cold. His eyes lifted slowly from the newspaper in his hand, fixing on me with a gaze that could cut through steel. "You," he said, voice deep and measured. "You were there that night." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied softly, setting the tray down. "You were in an accident." I remember," he interrupted. "You pulled me out." There was a pause. I thought he might say thank you. But instead, "Why?" I blinked. "Why what? Why did you help me?" His tone wasn't gratitude. It was suspicion, almost accusation. "Were you expecting a reward?" My chest tightened. "No, He set the paper aside and leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "Women always have reasons, miss." "Mei Lin," I answered, heat rising to my face. He nodded slowly, eyes scanning me as if I were a riddle he intended to solve. "Miss Mei Lin. People don't stop for broken strangers on the highway without expecting something in return. Especially not at midnight. So tell me, what do you want?" His words stung like slaps I couldn't block. "I just wanted to help," I whispered. He laughed, a hollow bitter sound that didn't reach his eyes. Help? Or maybe recognition? Media attention? A photo beside the CEO of Han Corporation? "No." My voice trembled, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. "I didn't even know who you were." He studied me, silence stretching like a blade between us. Then finally he turned away. People always say that before they show their true face. I stood there frozen, clutching the clipboard so hard my knuckles turned white. He didn't thank me, didn't even acknowledge what I'd done. Instead, he looked at me like I was the one who'd done something wrong. When I finally left the room, my throat burned. The corridor outside felt colder than before. "Are you all right?" another nurse asked as I passed. I forced a smile. "Yes. Just tired." But inside I was breaking. That night, when I walked home, the city lights blurred through my tears. I couldn't stop replaying his words. "Why did you help me? What do you want?" For the first time in my life, kindness felt like a crime. The next few days were unbearable. He refused every nurse except me, claiming consistency of care. But it wasn't trust, it was control. He'd ask for water only when I was busy, demand the curtains drawn then open again. Sometimes he'd call just to say nothing, watching me squirm in silence while pretending to adjust his four-line. Each interaction chipped at me, but I stayed quiet, patient, professional. Then one afternoon, as I was changing his bandages, he said quietly, "Your hands tremble every time you touch me." I froze. Sorry, sir. I didn't mean. Do I frighten you?" His voice softened, almost teasing, but the glint in his eyes was cruel curiosity. "No," I lied. He smiled faintly. "Then don't lie. I can tell." I turned away, pretending to write something in the chart, but my heart was pounding. What kind of man treats his savior like an intruder? I didn't know then that his cruelty wasn't about me. It was about something buried deep in his past, something that had turned his compassion to rust. But still it hurt. Every word from him reminded me of the same storm that nearly took his life, loud, merciless, and cold. A week later, when he was discharged, I thought that would be the end. But on my next shift, the hospital director called me into his office. "Mei Lin, there's been a special request," he said. "Mr. Han has personally asked for you to be his private medical assistant until he fully recovers." My mind went blank. Me? But why? The director smiled. "He said you're the only nurse he trusts." Trust. The word felt twisted on my tongue. I wanted to refuse. Every instinct screamed to say no. But the hospital needed his funding and I needed my job. So I nodded. That evening I found myself standing in front of a black limousine outside the hospital gates. My small bag clutched tightly. The driver opened the door. "Miss Mei Lin, Mr. Han is waiting." As the car pulled away, I looked back at the city skyline fading behind me, the hospital lights flickering like fading stars. I had no idea I was driving toward the center of a storm far worse than that rainy night. Inside the car, Han Liang sat in silence, looking out the window. His face was calm, but his reflection in the glass looked almost haunted. When our eyes met briefly, he said, "You should have left me on that road." His words sliced through me. I turned away, whispering under my breath, "Maybe I should have." He didn't reply, but I saw his jaw tighten just slightly, as if for the first time my words had reached a part of him he didn't want touched. The city lights passed like ghosts outside the window, and the air between us filled with something sharp and unspoken. That was the night I realized saving him wasn't fate. It was punishment. The night the limousine took me from the hospital felt like being pulled from one storm straight into another. Except this one didn't rage outside. It lived quietly inside the man sitting inches away from me. Han Liang. The man I'd once thought was just a stranger dying in the rain. Now he sat beside me, alive, silent, and terrifyingly unreadable. Neither of us spoke during the ride. The city lights streaked across the tinted glass like moving ghosts, washing our faces in flashes of silver and gold. Every few seconds I stole a glance at him. His sharp jawline, the faint scar above his brow, the darkness in his eyes that no amount of wealth could hide. When the car finally stopped, I found myself before a towering glass building that looked like it touched the clouds. Han Corporation headquarters. And somewhere near the top, his world. He stepped out first, adjusting his coat without looking at me. "Follow me," he said flatly. I obeyed, clutching my bag. Inside, marble floors gleamed like mirrors. Every person in the lobby bowed as he passed. Some whispered his name like a prayer. Others simply stepped aside, terrified of drawing his attention. It struck me then, this man was power itself. And I was just a nurse with second-hand shoes. We entered the private elevator. The doors slid shut with a metallic sigh, sealing us in an airless silence. He pressed the highest button. The numbers blinked upward: 50, 51, 52. When we reached the top, the doors opened into a wide office bathed in dusk light. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, where rain clouds were gathering again, swallowing the sun. "This," he said, walking toward his desk, "will be your workspace." I blinked. "Here? In your office?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured himself a glass of water and finally turned. "You'll monitor my blood pressure, manage my medication, and ensure I don't collapse again. You'll report directly to me, no one else." "Yes, Mr. Han," I said quietly. He nodded once, then added coldly, "And you will not mistake this for gratitude. You're here because I need efficiency, not sympathy." His words dropped like stones in a well, echoing in the hollow between us. I nodded again, holding the clipboard tighter. He studied me for a moment longer, then looked away. "You can go for today. The driver will take you home." When I turned to leave, his voice stopped me. "Miss Mei Lin," he said, and my name sounded strange on his tongue, sharp yet almost human. "Next time, don't look at me like that." I hesitated. "Like what?" "Like you pity me." I lowered my gaze. "I wasn't." "Good," he said softly, almost to himself, "because pity is worse than hate." For days I worked quietly by his side. I arrived early, stayed late, said little. I learned how he liked his tea lukewarm, never hot. How he always stopped working at 9:17 p.m. sharp to stare at the skyline for exactly 2 minutes. How sometimes, in those minutes, his expression changed from steel to sorrow. Once I caught him holding a photograph, just a glimpse before he hid it away. A woman smiling under cherry blossoms. Her eyes looked like spring after rain. "Who's that?" I asked before I could stop myself. He froze, then turned to me, his jaw tightening. "Don't ask questions that aren't yours to ask." I bowed my head. "I'm sorry." He didn't reply. But for the rest of the day, he didn't speak to me again. That night I couldn't sleep. The image of the photograph kept replaying in my mind. The woman's face, his reaction. Who was she? Why did her memory turn him to stone? A week later, a power outage hit the city during a thunderstorm. The elevator stopped mid-floor, trapping us inside. At first, neither of us spoke. I stood in the corner, clutching my phone flashlight, while he leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The silence between us grew heavy until he suddenly said, "You're afraid of the dark." I glanced up. "How do you know?" "You're shaking." "I'm not," I lied. He gave a faint, humorless smile. "You tremble when you lie." Another crack of thunder shook the elevator. I flinched, instinctively pressing back against the wall. For a second I thought he'd ignore me. But then he moved. Quietly. Slowly. He stepped closer, his presence filling the narrow space. I could smell his cologne, something cold, clean with a trace of cedarwood. Without a word, he took off his coat and draped it over my shoulders. "Don't read too much into it," he muttered, looking away. "You're no good to me if you faint." But his voice wasn't cruel this time. It was tired. "Thank you," I whispered. He didn't answer. For a long while, the only sounds were the rain outside and our breathing. In that dim light, I saw something I hadn't before. A loneliness carved deep into him. Not just grief, but guilt. And I began to wonder if his cruelty wasn't hatred, but a shield. When the power returned, the elevator hummed back to life. He straightened immediately, pulling his mask of composure back on. "Forget this happened," he said as the doors opened. But I couldn't. Because for the first time since that night in the rain, I'd seen the man behind the armor. A few evenings later, I arrived early and found the office empty. His desk light was still on. Curiosity, or maybe concern, made me glance at the file open on his screen. It was a medical report. Patient name, Lin Yin. Cause of death, traumatic explosion injuries. My breath caught. That name. The woman in the photograph. Before I could move, His voice came from behind me. Who gave you permission to touch that? I turned sharply, heart pounding. He stood by the door, expression unreadable, but his eyes burned. I didn't mean to. He took a step closer. Do you enjoy prying into other people's pain? No. I was just worried. Don't ever look into my past again, Mei Lin. His tone was low, dangerous. It's buried for a reason. He walked past me, slamming the file shut. The room went silent, but something in the air had changed. I wanted to apologize, but the words caught in my throat. Because in that moment, I realized something he didn't know. His buried past wasn't dead. It was still bleeding through every word, every stare, every cruel edge of his voice. And though I told myself to stay away, my heart whispered otherwise. Because somehow the more I saw of his darkness, the more I wanted to bring back his light. That night, as I left the building, rain started to fall again. The same kind of rain as the night I found him. And I thought maybe storms don't end. They just change form. But little did I know the real storm was still waiting. And when it hit, it wouldn't just destroy him. It would destroy me too. When I walked into his office the next morning, the storm outside had already begun to build. Gray skies pressing against the glass walls, thunder grumbling somewhere behind the skyline. Inside, it was quieter than usual. Too quiet. Han Liang stood by the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the rain. He didn't turn when I entered. Sir, your schedule. I began, but he cut me off. Cancel everything after noon. I hesitated. All of it. His tone left no room for question. Everything. I nodded and walked toward the desk, placing the clipboard down. Understood. He finally turned, eyes colder than the clouds outside. Do you know why I asked you to stay late yesterday? I froze. No, sir. He took a few steps closer. Because I needed to make sure. Make sure of what? That I wasn't imagining you. My breath caught. He continued, voice low, steady. The night you found me, I wasn't just running from death. I was running from myself. And you? He paused, gaze piercing mine. You pulled me back before I vanished completely. I didn't know what to say. His words sounded like gratitude, but his eyes, those eyes, looked like something else entirely. Mr. Han, I whispered, unsure if I should step closer or run. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a folder. When he placed it on the desk, my heart skipped. Inside was a single document printed in elegant gold-trimmed paper. A contract. Marry me, he said simply. For a moment I thought I'd misheard. What did you say? Marry me. His tone was calm, businesslike, as if he were negotiating a deal. For 1 year. I'll take care of your mother's medical expenses, your rent, and your brother's schooling. In return, you'll be my wife in name. I stared at him, stunned. Is this a joke? He didn't even blink. I don't joke. Why me? I demanded, voice trembling. You barely know me. His expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened. Because you remind me of someone I can't forget. And maybe, if I marry you, I'll finally be able to. The air in the room grew thick with something I couldn't name. So that was it. I was nothing more than a reflection, an echo of the woman in the photograph. I laughed bitterly, though it came out more like a sob. So I'd be what? Her replacement. He didn't deny it. I turned away. You're unbelievable. I'm offering security, he said sharply. You need money. I need peace. It's a transaction that benefits us both. Peace doesn't come from contracts. Neither does survival, he shot back. That silenced me. Because he was right, at least about the last part. The bills at the hospital were piling up. My mother's heart condition was worsening. My younger brother hadn't been to school in weeks because we couldn't afford transportation. Every night, I went to sleep praying for a miracle. Now one stood before me, except it wore a suit and spoke in cold bargains. He must have seen my hesitation because his tone softened slightly. Think about it. The driver will take you home. But I couldn't think. Not as the limousine drove through the rain again. Not as I climbed the stairs to my tiny apartment. Not even when my mother asked why I looked so pale. All I could hear were his words, "Marry me," and his eyes when he said it. Not cruel, not gentle, but desperate. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window watching the rain blur the city lights, feeling the weight of something too heavy to name. By dawn I made my decision. Because sometimes love doesn't save you. Necessity does. The next afternoon I returned to his office. He was at his desk signing papers when I entered. He didn't look up. "Have you decided?" "Yes," I said quietly. He stopped writing. "And I'll do it." For the first time he looked at me, really looked. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just something unreadable flickering behind his eyes. He nodded slowly, then slid the contract toward me. "Read it carefully." I skimmed through the clauses: confidentiality, cohabitation, a fixed term of 1 year. At the end, my name was already printed in neat letters. Maylin. His pen lay beside the paper. Picked it up. My hand shook as I signed. He signed immediately after, his movements precise and controlled. "It's done," he said simply. "The ceremony will be private. Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," I whispered. He nodded. "You'll move into the penthouse tonight." "Tonight?" "Yes." And just like that, my world spun again. By evening, a limousine waited outside my building. Neighbors stared as men in suits carried my few belongings, 2 bags, 1 box of books, into the gleaming car. Inside, everything smelled like new leather and faint perfume. "Where are we going?" I asked. "To your new home, Mrs. Hahn," the driver said politely. The word Mrs. Hahn made my stomach twist. When we reached the penthouse, I nearly forgot to breathe. The entire floor belonged to him, or now to us. White marble floors, glass walls overlooking the skyline, chandeliers dripping with light. It was beautiful and utterly lifeless. He was waiting near the window, dressed in casual black for once. "You came," he said softly. "I signed the contract," I reminded him. "I keep my word." He nodded, stepping closer. "So do I." Then, unexpectedly, he took off his wristwatch and placed it in my hand. "From now on," he said, "this time belongs to both of us." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He met my eyes. "You saved my life once. Maybe this is me trying to save yours." I wanted to reply, but the words tangled in my throat. Because behind that cold voice, I heard something fragile, something human. And before I could stop myself, I asked, "Will this marriage mean anything to you?" He paused. "Ask me again in a year." That night, I lay in a bed too soft to feel real, staring at the ceiling while the rain tapped gently against the windows. Down the hall, I could hear faint footsteps, his, pacing, restless, haunted. The city below glowed like a sea of stars, but I felt smaller than ever. I whispered into the dark, "Father, if you can hear me, I'm sorry." Because I had once sworn never to let another rich man control my fate. And now I had just married one. Not for love, not for hope, but for the fragile promise of survival. Still, somewhere deep inside me, a dangerous question began to grow. What if this was more than survival? What if, somewhere beneath his grief and guilt, there was still a heart waiting to be found? I closed my eyes, and as the thunder rolled across the sky, I wondered if love could be born from a deal signed in desperation. Because something told me, our storm was only beginning. The ink on the paper gleamed faintly under the chandelier as if mocking me. My trembling hand hovered over the last line, where my name was meant to go. Xiaomei. Mr. Lu's voice was calm, stripped of all emotion. "No one's forcing you. But once you sign it, there's no turning back." His words sounded like mercy but felt like a sentence. I thought of my mother lying in that cold hospital bed, her body shrinking day by day because I couldn't afford another week's medicine. The nurse's eyes had been pitying this morning when she said, "If you can't pay by Friday, we'll have to stop treatment." My pen touched the paper. "Fine," I whispered, my voice almost lost in the vast marble office. "I'll do it." He didn't smile. He only nodded once as if approving a business deal. Then he stood, extending his hand. "Welcome, Mrs. Lu." It felt surreal, like a cruel joke written by fate. That night, the limousine waited outside the Lu Corporation building, sleek and silent. The driver opened the door for me, his expression unreadable. Inside, the city glittered beyond the tinted glass. So close yet unreachable. Mr. Lu sat beside me, his posture perfect, his gaze forward. The air between us was heavy with unspoken rules. Where are we going? I asked softly. He turned his head just slightly. Home. The way he said it didn't sound like comfort. It sounded like confinement. When the limousine stopped, I stepped out into a world I'd never imagined. A private penthouse sitting atop the tallest tower in the district. Everything gleamed. Glass, steel, and silence. A maid bowed as we entered. Prepare the guest room, Mr. Lu instructed. Guest room. Of course. I stood by the window, staring at the city below, feeling like I'd been traded for survival. He loosened his tie and glanced at me. You'll have access to any part of the house except my study. You'll accompany me to public events when necessary. You'll receive a monthly allowance, and your mother's medical expenses will be handled by my assistant. Every word was calculated. Every kindness came with conditions. And in return? I asked quietly. His gaze met mine, steady, cold, unreadable. You'll be Mrs. Lu. I almost laughed. That's it. That's everything. I wanted to scream at him, to ask why he wanted this marriage, why me, a nobody, a maid. But when I opened my mouth, no words came out. Only exhaustion. Days passed in a blur of luxury and emptiness. Every morning, breakfast was laid out like a feast. He sat across from me, reading financial reports while I ate in silence. Sometimes I'd catch him staring, not at me but through me. His eyes softened, distant, as if chasing a ghost only he could see. Once I asked, "Do I remind you of someone?" He froze mid-motion. The silver spoon clinked softly against the porcelain bowl. His lips parted slightly, then closed again. "Finish your meal," was all he said before standing and leaving. That night, I heard him in his room. A soft whisper through the walls. Yin Yin. The name tore at me. One evening, as I was placing fresh flowers in the living room, a servant approached me timidly. "Madam," she said, lowering her gaze, "do you know why the master doesn't smile?" I shook my head. She sighed. "It's because of Madam Yin Yin, his late wife. She died 2 years ago. Saved him from a car explosion. Since then he's been different." The word struck like lightning. Late wife. Explosion. Suddenly everything made sense. The drunken man in the rain, the haunted eyes, the name he whispered. He hadn't chosen me. He'd chosen a shadow of the woman he lost. That night I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The rain outside was soft, the kind that brushed the windows like sighs. I turned my face toward the ceiling and whispered, "Yin, whoever you are, he's still living in your world." A strange ache spread through me. Part sorrow, part envy. Why did it hurt to know he loved someone so deeply that even death couldn't erase her? The next morning I found him in the study, the one I wasn't supposed to enter. He was sitting before a piano, fingers tracing over dust-covered keys. I hesitated at the door. "I didn't know you played." He didn't look up. "I don't anymore." Then his fingers pressed a single note, soft, broken. It echoed through the silence, trembling like a memory. "I used to play for her," he murmured. "Every night before bed. She said it sounded like home." His voice cracked on the last word. I didn't move closer. I just stood there, watching him fight a battle I couldn't see, one that I was already losing simply by being in his life. Days turned into weeks. Our marriage existed in polite exchanges and quiet meals. But sometimes, just sometimes, I'd see something flicker behind his eyes. A warmth that startled even him. Once, I tripped while watering the balcony plants. Before I could fall, he caught me, his hand gripping mine tightly. Our faces were inches apart, breath tangled. His eyes searched mine, not for Yin Yin, not for a ghost. For a second it felt like he saw me. But then he stepped back abruptly. "Be careful," he said, voice strained. He left before I could answer. That night I cried quietly under my pillow, not because I wanted his love, but because I realized I already did. I had stepped into this marriage for money, for survival. But now, I was drowning in feelings I couldn't name. The man I should have hated had become the one I silently prayed would look at me, not as a replacement, not as a debt, but as Xiaomei. And somewhere in the stillness of that night, I made a promise to myself. If he was trapped by his past, then I'd be the one to lead him out. Even if it broke me. The rain hadn't stopped for days. It drummed softly against the glass walls of the penthouse, as if echoing the quiet distance that had settled between us. Mr. Liu, my husband, sat across the table, reading his morning reports as usual. His hair was perfectly in place, his silver watch gleaming against his wrist. Everything about him screamed control, precision, restraint. And me? I felt like a fragile stain in his immaculate world. "Would you like more tea?" I asked softly, breaking the silence. He didn't look up. "No, thank you." His tone was polite, almost gentle, but colder than the rain outside. Every morning was the same. Polite greetings, empty words, and silence that stretched longer than the horizon. We lived together like two strangers bound by paper. That night I stood by the window, watching the city lights blur through the fog. Somewhere below, laughter spilled from a cafe. A couple ran under a shared umbrella, holding each other close. I wrapped my arms around myself, whispering to the empty air, "Do you even remember what warmth feels like, Mr. Liu?" Behind me, I heard the faint sound of a door opening. I turned, and there he was standing in the hallway, a file in his hand. His eyes flicked toward me briefly before glancing away. "It's late," he said simply. "You should rest." His voice carried no emotion. Yet the way his gaze lingered for half a heartbeat on my wet lashes told me something deeper. A silent struggle he'd never admit. "I'm not tired," I murmured. He nodded once and walked away, the sound of his footsteps fading into the corridor. And just like that, the distance between us stretched again, thin, invisible, and unbreakable. Days turned into weeks. He came home late most nights, his shoulders heavy with unspoken thoughts. I waited, pretending to read by the fireplace, just so I could see the moment he walked through the door. Sometimes I'd offer him soup. Sometimes he'd take it. Once, as I set a bowl down before him, his hand brushed mine. The contact lasted only a second, but it felt like a spark against ice. His hand froze. Then he pulled away, murmuring, "You shouldn't trouble yourself with this." "Trouble?" He called my care trouble. I smiled weakly, masking the ache that spread through my chest. "If it's trouble, then maybe I like it," I whispered. He looked up sharply, but I was already walking away. At night, I'd hear him moving restlessly in the next room. Sometimes pacing, sometimes sighing, and sometimes, just sometimes, I'd hear her name. Yin Yin. The first time I froze in bed, my heart twisting painfully. The second time I cried silently into my pillow. The third time I whispered back to the dark, "She's gone, Mr. Liu. But I'm still here." He never heard me. Or maybe he did and just didn't care. One afternoon, while arranging flowers in the living room, I accidentally knocked over a framed photo. It hit the floor with a sharp crack, the glass splintering across the smiling faces inside. I froze. It was a photo of him and her. She was beautiful, long hair, gentle eyes, a warmth that the photo itself seemed to breathe. He stood beside her, smiling like a man who had once believed in forever. I picked up the frame carefully, running a trembling finger across her face. "So you're Yin," I whispered. "The woman who still owns his heart." Part of me wanted to hate her, but instead I felt something else, pity. Because maybe, if love could trap a man so completely, then losing it must have felt like dying. That night, I gathered the courage to ask him. We were having dinner, the quiet ticking of the clock our only company. "Mr. Liu," I said carefully, "what was she like?" "Yin Yin." His knife paused mid-cut. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he set it down slowly and leaned back in his chair. "Why do you want to know?" I want to understand." His gaze locked with mine, sharp, defensive, and deeply tired. "Understanding won't change anything." "Maybe not," I said softly. "But silence won't either." He exhaled, his expression unreadable. For a second I thought he would walk away again. But instead he looked down at his plate, his voice breaking slightly when he spoke. She was kind, stubborn, always saw the good in people even when it hurt her. She believed I could be better. The way he said it, quiet, reverent, hollow, made my chest ache. Then, as if realizing he had said too much, he straightened, mask snapping back into place. That's enough. And just like that, the door between us slammed shut again. That night I dreamed of her, Yin standing in the rain reaching for him. And behind her I stood invisible, watching as he walked toward her shadow, never once turning my way. When I woke up my pillow was damp with tears. Few days later I fell sick. The exhaustion, the emotional strain. It all finally caught up. My fever burned through the night, and though I tried to hide it, my body betrayed me. The last thing I remembered was collapsing near the kitchen counter. When I woke, the room was dim, and the familiar scent of cedar and mint filled the air. A cool hand rested on my forehead. "Don't move," a deep voice said. My eyes fluttered open, and I saw him sitting beside me, his expression tight with concern. "You should have told me you were sick," he muttered, his voice low. "I didn't think you'd care," I said weakly. His eyes darkened as if my words had struck something deep. "Don't say that." For the first time his voice wasn't cold, it was human. He stayed by my bedside all night, quietly changing the wet towel on my forehead, checking my temperature. I drifted in and out of sleep, and once when I half woke, I felt his fingers brush mine gently. "Why do you do this to me, Xiao Mei?" he whispered, almost to himself. It was the first time he'd ever said my name like that, softly, painfully, as if it mattered. When I finally recovered, he avoided me again. But something in the air had changed just slightly. He lingered longer at breakfast. He asked about my mother's condition. And sometimes when our eyes met across the room, I saw something fragile flicker in his gaze, like a man standing at the edge of a thawing lake, afraid of what warmth might do to the ice beneath him. I didn't know what we were becoming, but I knew one thing for certain. The wall between us was beginning to crack. The morning light felt different that day, muted, heavy, as though the sky itself knew that something was about to break. I had just finished changing the bedsheets when I overheard two servants whispering in the hall. "She shouldn't be in that room," one said nervously. "Why not?" the other asked. "That used to be her room. Madame Yanyan's." The sound of that name froze me where I stood. Yanyan. I waited until they left before walking quietly through the corridor. The air grew still as I reached the farthest door on the left, one I'd never seen opened. Its brass handle was polished, untouched, like a shrine no one dared disturb. My fingers hesitated on the knob, but some force, curiosity, pain, maybe need, made me turn it anyway. The door creaked softly. Inside, the room was preserved like time itself had stopped mourning. Soft cream curtains, a dressing table lined with perfume bottles now collecting dust, a piano near the window with sheet music still open to a half-played melody. On the wall hung a wedding photo, Mr. Liu and Yin smiling under a shower of rose petals. He looked unrecognizably alive. I stepped closer, tracing the edge of her face in the frame. Her smile was gentle, her eyes bright. She looked like sunlight made human. No wonder he still dreamed of her. "Miss Xiaomei." The deep voice behind me startled me so sharply I nearly dropped the frame. I turned, and there he was standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, they weren't angry. They were haunted. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I shouldn't have." He raised a hand to stop me. "It's all right." For a moment neither of us moved. Only the sound of the rain tapping against the window filled the silence. Then slowly he walked in and stood beside me. "This was her room," he said quietly. "I haven't opened it in 2 years." I looked at him carefully. His jaw was tense, but his voice trembled ever so slightly. "She died saving me," he continued. "There was an explosion. The car caught fire. I told her to run." His throat tightened. "But she pushed me out instead." The image was brutal. A woman dying in fire just to save the man she loved. I said nothing because what words could ever match that kind of pain? That night, the story spread among the staff. Some spoke of how Mr. Liu stopped smiling after the accident, how he buried himself in work, refusing to touch her things. It explained everything. His distance, his silences, the way he'd flinch when thunder rolled through the night. And yet, knowing it didn't make it hurt any less. Because I was living with a ghost. Not her, but the memory of her that still owned him. Days passed. He seemed quieter than before, but also softer. Once, I caught him standing by the piano, touching the keys as if they might speak to him. Did she play? I asked gently. He nodded. Every night. She said music was her way of making sadness beautiful. Then why did you stop? He looked up, his eyes shadowed. Because I was afraid it would remind me of her. Maybe that's not a bad thing, I said softly. Maybe remembering her could also mean forgiving yourself. He didn't answer, but later that night when I passed the hall, I heard faint piano notes drifting from her room. Hesitant. Broken. But alive again. Weeks went by. We found small ways to exist around each other. He'd join me for breakfast sometimes. He'd ask about my brother's school, about the flowers I planted on the balcony. They were little things, but they felt like sunlight slipping through cracks in a closed room. Still, Yinan lingered like perfume that refused to fade. Once I saw him holding a locket in the study. Inside was her picture, and a ring identical to the one I wore. He caught me watching and quickly put it away. Some ghosts, he murmured, don't leave even when you beg them to. Maybe they stay, I said quietly, until you stop calling them. His eyes met mine, then long searching, and for the first time I thought I saw him wondering if he could. But peace never lasts long in a house built on sorrow. One evening, an older maid named Aunt Chun came to me, her expression heavy. Miss Xiaomei, she said softly, you should know something. She handed me a photo, torn, water-stained, old. It was Mr. Liu and Yin Yan sitting by a lake. But behind them, faintly visible in the background, was a small cafe. My cafe. The one I used to work at before all this. I frowned. Why are they? She used to go there often, Aunt Chen explained. She said she liked the warmth in your smile. I think she mentioned you once. My breath caught. She knew me. Not well. But she said, that girl has a kind heart. If I ever leave this world, I hope someone like her stays by his side. My hands trembled as I stared at the photo. So even before I knew him, our lives had brushed in passing. And now, in some strange twist of fate, I was standing where she once stood, filling the silence she left behind. That night I couldn't sleep. I found myself walking toward the balcony, the city lights glowing faintly through the drizzle. And there he was again, sitting on the steps, a half-empty glass beside him. Can't sleep? He asked, not turning. Neither can you, I replied. He gave a soft, humorless laugh. Seems we both have ghosts to answer to. I hesitated before sitting beside him. The rain had softened, cool and gentle against my skin. Do you ever think, I began slowly, that maybe she sent me that night? The night I found you drunk in the street. He looked at me sharply. Why would you say that? Because I wasn't supposed to be there. My shift ended early. I took a different road home. And then there you were. For a long time he said nothing. Then he sighed, his voice quieter than the rain. Yin Yin used to say that kindness is a circle. What you give away always finds its way back. He turned to me, his eyes unreadable, something fragile flickering in their depths. Maybe you're my circle, Xiaomei. My breath caught. Before I could speak, he looked away again, retreating behind the familiar wall of silence. But I knew what I'd seen. A man caught between past and present, between grief and something that terrified him even more, hope. The next morning I found fresh lilies in the vase beside Yin Yan's photo. And beside it, a small card in his handwriting. Rest now. She's safe with me. I didn't need to ask who she was. Because for the first time I felt it, the ghost of his past was finally letting go. And maybe, just maybe, he was learning to live again. The days after that night blurred softly, like the edges of a dream you don't want to wake from. Mr. Luzian had changed. The man who once walked through his mansion like a ghost now lingered in doorways, asking quietly if I'd eaten, if my mother's medicine had arrived, if the lilies on the balcony needed water. It wasn't love yet, but it was something warmer than silence, something slower than healing kindness. And I didn't know what to do with it. That morning the rain had finally stopped after 3 straight days. Sunlight filtered through the marble windows, scattering over the breakfast table. I was stirring porridge when he entered, his tie undone, hair slightly tousled from sleep. For once he didn't look like the unapproachable CEO whose name commanded boardrooms. He looked human, tired, gentle, almost shy. "You made this?" he asked, glancing at the steam curling above the bowl. "I do every morning," I replied, avoiding his gaze. "I never noticed." I smiled faintly. "You were always gone before dawn." He paused, then picked up the spoon, tasting it like it was something sacred. "This tastes peaceful." I didn't know porridge could make someone sound grateful, but he said it like it had saved him. Later that day, while tending to the garden, I caught him watching me from the balcony. Not the way he used to, guard it, distant, but quietly, like a man rediscovering the world. I felt his gaze linger as I knelt by the lilies, trimming away dry petals. My hands were stained with soil, my hair loose and messy. Yet, for the first time, I didn't feel small. When I looked up, our eyes met through the sunlight, and he didn't look away. Something in my chest fluttered so hard it hurt. That evening I fell sick. It started with dizziness, then fever. By nightfall I could barely stand. I tried to hide it, not wanting to cause trouble. But when I fainted by the hallway, the world spun into darkness. When I opened my eyes, I was in bed. The room smelled faintly of cedar and rain. My head rested on soft pillows I didn't recognize. Then I heard it, the sound of someone pacing. He was there, sleeves rolled up, jacket thrown aside, eyes full of panic. "Don't move," he said, rushing to my side as soon as I tried to sit up. "You collapsed from exhaustion." I blinked, disoriented. "You carried me?" He hesitated. Who else would I trust to? He said it like it was obvious, like my life mattered to him. I felt his cool hand press against my forehead, the heat of his palm contrasting the chill of my skin. "You're burning up," he murmured. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "Because it's just a fever," I whispered. "I didn't want to." "Risk your health to prove your strength?" His tone softened. "You don't have to do that anymore." I turned away, tears stinging the corners of my eyes. "It's hard to believe that." He was silent for a long moment, then said quietly, "It's hard for me too, believing I can still care for someone." Something fragile broke between us. He stayed beside me that night, refusing to leave even when I begged him to rest. I remember drifting in and out of fever dreams, and every time I woke, he was there reading, changing the towel on my forehead, murmuring something I couldn't quite hear. Once I caught his words clearly. "Don't leave me again." But this time it wasn't Yinyan's name he said. It was mine. By morning the fever broke. When I opened my eyes, sunlight streamed across the sheets, and he was asleep in the chair beside me, head tilted, hair falling into his eyes. I stared at him for a long time. His features were softer in rest, stripped of the steel armor he wore every day. He'd kept watch all night. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The pity I'd once felt turned into something terrifyingly gentle. Something that made my heart ache every time he looked away too quickly. Maybe this was how love began. Not in fireworks, but in the quiet miracle of someone choosing to stay. Days turned into weeks. We began sharing small rituals. He'd make coffee, I'd cook breakfast. We'd walk together through the garden after dinner, sometimes talking, sometimes not. Once he helped me fix a broken vase. We both ended up with glue on our hands, laughing like children. "Careful," he warned, trying to peel dried glue from my fingers. "You're worse at this than I am," I teased. He looked up then, his gaze locking with mine, warm, unguarded. "You make me worse at many things, Xiaomei." I froze. The words hung between us, delicate and dangerous. And then he smiled. A real one, small, fleeting. but it lit his whole face like dawn breaking after endless night. I realized I'd never seen him truly smile before, and I wanted to protect that smile for the rest of my life. But love in this house felt like walking on glass. Every corner still whispered Yinyan's name. Every servant still lowered their gaze when we passed. The walls themselves seemed to test us, asking whether this fragile warmth could survive the weight of memory. One night, I asked him the question that had been burning in me for weeks. Do you ever feel guilty for being happy again? He was quiet for a long time before answering. Every day. But when I see you, I think maybe happiness isn't betrayal. It's survival. The tears I'd been holding back fell freely then. He reached out, hesitated, and then brushed them away with his thumb. His touch lingered, gentle, trembling, human. No more words were spoken. But in that silence, something deeper than promises was born. The next morning I found a new vase on the balcony, filled with fresh lilies. A small note was tucked beside it in his handwriting. You turned my house of ghosts into a home again. I pressed the note to my heart, smiling through tears I couldn't stop. Because I knew this wasn't pity anymore. It wasn't debt or loneliness. It was love, fragile and real, blooming in the ruins of grief. That evening when he returned from work, he paused by the door and said softly, "You look like sunshine after rain." And I answered, my voice trembling, "That's because you finally opened the window." He laughed. A sound so rare it filled the whole house with life. And for the first time I felt what it meant to belong, not as his savior, not as a shadow of his past, but as the woman who taught him how to breathe again. But even as joy began to bloom, a storm was gathering outside. One that would test whether our love could survive the truth waiting to be revealed. Love has a strange way of making the world glow right before it shatters. For weeks, everything between us felt fragile but beautiful. Lu Zian smiled more, the staff whispered less, and the house that once echoed with sorrow began to hum with life again. But that's when I should have known. The past never disappears quietly. It waits like thunder before the rain. It started one ordinary afternoon. I was in the study sorting files he'd asked me to organize. Most were contracts, business plans, property deeds. But one thin envelope caught my attention. No name, no seal, just a faint scent of old perfume clinging to the paper. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside were photographs. A woman in a white cheongsam smiled beside Lu Zian. Her eyes sparkled with the same warmth I'd seen in his when he looked at me. And then I froze. Because behind her stood me. Younger, thinner, dressed as a waitress at the hotel where I used to work part-time years ago. I was serving drinks while the two of them toasted with wine. My hands trembled. Why was I there? Why had he never said anything? I flipped to the back of the last photo, and my breath caught. In his handwriting dated 4 years ago. She looks just like you, Maybe that's why I can't look away. The room spun. My heart cracked like glass under pressure. So that was the truth. I wasn't special. I was a shadow. A substitute for the woman he loved and lost. When he came home that night, I couldn't hide it. The photographs lay scattered across the table like wounds that refused to close. He froze at the sight, his expression collapsing from calm to panic. "Where did you find these?" "In the drawer you told me to clean," I said, my voice shaking. "Were you planning to tell me the truth?" "Xiaomei, it's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "Not what I think. You wrote that I looked like her. That's why you noticed me, isn't it? You never loved me. You just missed her." He stepped closer, desperate. "At first, maybe I did see her shadow in you. But it's different now." "Different?" My voice broke. "You call me by her name when you dream. You flinch when I wear white. Tell me, Zian, how is that different?" He closed his eyes, pain flashing across his face. "Because now when I think of warmth, it's your face I see." For a moment I wanted to believe him. But then I remembered how I'd begged the universe for love, and how cruelly it always demanded payment. "You don't understand," I whispered. "To you she was love. To me she's a ghost I can never outrun." And before he could stop me I ran. The rain started as soon as I stepped outside. The city lights blurred through tears and water, my reflection flickering in every puddle like a stranger's face. I didn't know where to go, only that I couldn't breathe in that mansion anymore. I ended up at the hospital where my mother was being treated. Her eyes widened when she saw me soaked to the bone. "Xiaomei, what happened?" I forced a smile. "Nothing, Mama. Just tired." But mothers always see through lies. She reached out, brushing my hair back gently. "Sometimes," she said softly, "people love us with broken hearts. It's not your fault they're still healing. But it's also not your duty to bleed for them." Her words hit deep. I wanted to stay there forever, safe in the simplicity of her wisdom. But the world outside refused to wait. The next morning, a black car pulled up outside the hospital. He'd found me. Lu Zian stepped out, rain still clinging to his coat, eyes dark with exhaustion. "Xiaomei," he said quietly, "please don't run from me." I stood my ground. "You lied to me." He shook his head. "No. I lied to myself. I thought loving again was betrayal, so I convinced myself I loved her shadow instead of you. But the truth is, I can't remember her face anymore without seeing yours." I wanted to look away, but his voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. He took a small step closer. "Do you remember the night you fainted? You murmured something in your sleep." I frowned. "What?" "You said, 'Don't leave me alone in the rain.'" His voice softened. "That's when I realized I was the one standing in the storm, and you were the only one who ever tried to pull me out." My throat tightened. "Then why keep those photos?" "Because I couldn't let go of the guilt. I kept them to remind myself of what I'd lost. But after you came, they only reminded me of what I was afraid to lose again." He pulled a crumpled envelope from his coat and handed it to me. "I was going to burn them. I just didn't know how to tell you without losing you." Inside were the same photographs, only now torn in half, edges still warm from fire. I looked up. His eyes were raw, empty of pride, full of plea. "Believe me," he whispered. "You're not her shadow. You're my sunrise." My tears mixed with the rain as I stepped forward. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I said softly. "Not that you compared me to her, but that I almost believed I was worth less than her memory." He reached out, gently taking my trembling hands. "You were never less. I was the one blind enough not to see it sooner." For a moment, the storm around us disappeared. The world was just the two of us, broken, raw, and trying to love again. He leaned his forehead against mine. "Let me earn the right to love you honestly, Xiaomei. No ghosts. No lies." I didn't answer right away. My heart was a battlefield of fear and hope. But as his hands held mine, not with possession but apology, I realized something. Love isn't about finding perfection. It's about forgiving imperfection enough to stay. And maybe, just maybe, I was strong enough to try. That night, back at the mansion, I walked into the gallery where Yinyan's portrait still hung. For months it had haunted every corner of this place. Slowly I reached up and touched the frame. "Thank you," I whispered, "for loving him once. But it's time he learns to live again." Then I turned to him, who stood behind me silently, eyes full of awe and regret. "Tomorrow," I said, "take it down." He nodded, voice barely a whisper. "Together." As dawn crept over the horizon, the mansion felt lighter, as if the ghosts themselves had exhaled and vanished. He stood beside me, watching the sunrise through the balcony glass. The same man who once lived in darkness now looked at me like I was the light he'd been searching for. "Xiaomei," he said, "if love is rebirth, then you're the first breath I've taken in years." And I smiled through my tears. Because maybe, after all the pain, the truth hadn't destroyed us. It had finally set us free. But peace never lasts long in this world. And the next morning, a single phone call would undo everything we thought we'd rebuilt. Just when I thought peace had finally returned to our lives, fate reminded me that love stories are never written in straight lines. The morning after the rain, the air smelled of jasmine and new beginnings. I woke to find Lu Zian in the kitchen, shirt sleeves rolled up, awkwardly burning toast while pretending he knew what he was doing. For a man who once ordered breakfast by snapping his fingers, It was almost funny. He looked up when he saw me, a shy smile tugging at his lips. I thought I'd surprise you. I laughed softly. You did. The smoke alarm almost beat you to it. He grinned sheepishly, and for the first time, I saw him not as the cold CEO, but as a man truly trying, to rebuild a heart he'd buried long ago. But before we could even sit down, his phone buzzed. He frowned at the caller ID. Then without a word he answered. Within seconds, his face drained of color. What? He whispered. That can't be true. I stepped closer. Zian. He hung up, eyes distant. Someone leaked our marriage contract to the press. Again. This time with details, dates, payments, even your mother's medical bills. My stomach turned cold. But I thought we destroyed those documents. He clenched his jaw. Someone had copies. Someone inside the company. By noon, the scandal exploded across every news outlet. CEO Lu's wife exposed as paid companion. Marriage built on lies. Cinderella or con artist. The truth behind the contract bride. Pictures of me in my maid uniform plastered every screen. My name trended for all the wrong reasons. When I tried to go outside, reporters swarmed the gates, shouting questions that cut like knives. Xiaomei, did you seduce him for money? Is it true your mother's hospital bills were paid by Lu Corporation? Are you just a stand-in for his late wife? I couldn't answer. My throat refused to form words. Zian's security team forced them away, but the damage was done. Inside, I collapsed against the wall, trembling. He found me there minutes later, his eyes filled with guilt. This is my fault, he said hoarsely. I should have protected you better. No, I whispered. You warned me once, that loving you came with a price. I just didn't know it would be this high. That night, the city buzzed with gossip while our mansion stayed painfully silent. I sat by the window staring at the rain. The same rain that once brought us together now blurred everything again. Behind me, he said quietly, they've called for a press conference. The board wants me to step down until the scandal clears. My heart ached. Zian, your reputation. He shook his head. Reputation means nothing if I lose the person who taught me how to feel again. He came closer, kneeling before me. Let them say what they want. But I won't let them hurt you. I touched his face gently, feeling the tremor beneath his skin. And if this destroys everything you built? He smiled faintly. Then I'll rebuild it, with you. The next day, he stood before hundreds of flashing cameras. I watched from the sidelines, my palms cold with fear. He adjusted the microphone, voice calm but sharp. You all know me as the man who never makes mistakes, he began. But today I'll admit one, I fell in love. A murmur spread through the crowd. Yes, Xiaomei and I signed a contract, he continued. I was a fool who thought emotions could be contained in paper. She needed help and I offered it selfishly. But what began as a transaction turned into something I never expected, truth. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room until it found me. She didn't trap me. She saved me. His voice cracked slightly. Not once but twice. The night she found me in the rain, she gave me back my life. And when I was drowning in guilt, she gave me something even rarer, hope. The crowd fell silent. Even the reporters who had come to tear us apart looked uncertain now. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old, torn photos of Yan Yan. I kept these for years because I was too afraid to let go. But love isn't about holding on to ghosts. It's about learning to live again. He dropped the photos into a glass bowl and set them alight. Flames reflected in his eyes as he said, my past burned long ago. It's time my heart did too. Then to everyone's shock, he turned toward me. Xiaomei, he said softly but clearly, if you'll have me, not as a contract, not as redemption, but as a man who's finally learned what love means, marry me again. The entire room gasped. Cameras flashed. My breath caught. And suddenly all the noise, all the judgment, all the pain faded. It was just him. The man I had once dragged from the rain. I walked forward trembling, tears spilling freely. I never needed your wealth, I said. Only your truth. And with that I took his hand. The next morning the headlines had changed. CEO Lou declares his love in public. From scandal to proposal, a real-life Cinderella story. The storm had finally passed. But even after the world forgave us, healing wasn't instant. He resigned temporarily to spend time with me and my mother. We moved out of the mansion and into a quiet home near the coast, a place where the sea whispered peace instead of gossip. There he learned to cook without burning the kitchen. I learned to trust without fear. Sometimes we argued, sometimes we laughed, but every night, we held hands under the same stars that once watched us suffer. Months later, on a night heavy with rain, the same kind that started it all, he led me outside barefoot into the downpour. "Do you remember?" he asked, smiling. "How could I forget?" I laughed through the rain. "You were drunk and I thought you were dying." He chuckled. "And you thought saving me was a mistake." "It almost was," I teased. "Until you learned to make breakfast." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, not grand but simple, elegant, glowing faintly even under the storm. "This time," he said, kneeling, "there's no contract, no condition, no ghost between us. Just two people who survived the rain." Tears blurred my vision. "You're proposing again? Under the rain?" He smiled. "I figured it's our kind of luck." I covered my mouth, laughing and crying all at once. "You're ridiculous." "Maybe. But I'm yours." And before I could answer, he slid the ring onto my trembling finger. "I, Lou, he whispered. "Choose you, Xiaomei, not as a savior, not as a replacement, but as the woman who taught me to live." The thunder rolled in the distance, but I didn't care. I wrapped my arms around him, whispering, "I choose you too." Rain soaked us, washing away the last trace of our pain. And for the first time in years we didn't run from the storm, we danced in it. Later that night, as I dried my hair by the window, he handed me a small leather-bound journal. "What's this?" I asked. "Your story," he said. "I wanted the world to hear it from your words, not their headlines." I opened it and froze. Inside were pages filled with his handwriting. Every moment, every memory, written from his perspective. At the end, one sentence was underlined. "The night she found me, I thought I was dying. But in truth, that was the night I began to live." My tears fell onto the page, smudging his ink. I looked up, heart overflowing. "You wrote all this?" He nodded shyly. "It's not perfect." I smiled through my tears. "It's everything." Months passed and life grew quiet. But sometimes when I walked by the window and saw the rain, I'd smile to myself. Because once upon a storm, a poor maid saved a stranger. And that stranger, broken, lost, and drunk in despair, found not just life but love. Love that didn't come wrapped in diamonds or contracts. Love that didn't need witnesses or promises. Love that simply stayed even when the world didn't. The night I found him, I thought I was saving a stranger. But maybe he was saving me too, from a life without love, without courage, without rain. Because sometimes the storm isn't the end. It's where forever begins.